Okay, so by now we have a really nice, fully functional application in this regard. We have a little bit of extra links, even though this isn't super amazing. But what are some nice things we could do to just improve maybe the overall experience of this? And this isn't like monumental or something, but when you click one and you vote, yeah, it just sort of flashes a new one. And I'm not saying you need to animate everything on your website, right? Not like an animate all the things sort of thing or anything, but some animation does go a long way in helping the user identify what's happening. For instance, this quick flash, they might not understand that the one you voted for went away and then a new one came in. So animations serve a bigger purpose than just looking pretty occasionally. So let's go ahead, and what we want to do is you want to Google React CSS transition group, and this will take you to the official docs. What this is this an actual part of React here. And so we don't need to add anything else to get animations going in React, but we do need to add React CSS transition group. So what you want to do is come up here to the top and select where it says import from, right? React-add-ons-css-transition-group. Honestly, it's not something I would recommend just totally typing in. So you want to make sure you're copying and pasting it from somewhere. Either that or you can type it. It's your choice. And we can do npm install and then paste that in there. React add-ons CSS transition group. Now that's going to be added to our project. We can actually come and grab this whole import statement, because why type this if we don't have to, right? So let's come back to our application. You may notice somewhere along the line the purple bar at the top of my atom disappeared. It was an update to the theme and it removed it. So I didn't do that on purpose. It's gone if you were wondering. And so at the top here, well, let's actually see where we want to have this transition group applied here. If we scroll down, what we have is several items, right? We have each item being added here, and we have this overall array of items being mapped over. So what we would want to do is we'd really just want to take this React CSS transition group element here and wrap it around this entire this.props.items. So let's come up to the top. Let's paste in our import statement, and we should have access to the React CSS transition group element. And this is a React component. Even though I've been saying element, it functions the way a React component. So this is just a simple React component, basically, that adds classes. So what we want to do is copy React CSS transition group, this whole thing here. It's a big long name for a component, and we're going to wrap our this.props in this component. Now you'll see really quickly, just by simply wrapping this in here, nothing's going to really happen because we need a little bit of extra stuff to get this going. But what this is doing essentially for our project is nothing more than adding and removing classes based on timing. So it's going to time it based on values that you give it, and it's going to remove and add classes very similar to how ng-animate worked if you ever used Angular's animating system. So you have like an enter and a leave and an appear, I believe, different classes. So let's actually head to the docs. And you can see some of the parameters, the props that are being added here are transition name, transition enter timeout, transition leave timeout. Now, if you don't use all of these, it's going to complain. In fact, if we head to our app and open up and come to our inspector, let's head to console, you're seeing we're already getting a whole bunch of errors. In fact, this is the same kind of error you would see if you didn't supply one of the required props, like exactly the same way that we did when we built our own isRole component. So as you can see here, this is just a regular React component. In fact, if you paw through the source code, it should look familiar. But as you can see, all it is simply saying, hey, transition name is required and you didn't have it. Okay, so first, let's add transition name. Let's get rid of that error. And so let's come to our props. I'm going to put this on a new line. You can do that with your React props here. It doesn't care if you have your props on a new line. And we can say equals. And actually, let's just give this a string value. And this is simply going to be transition name. This is going to be item. Item hyphen And that doesn't seem like it's that crazy, but this is only being used for CSS, so we shouldn't really need to worry about this. Keep in mind that any transition you make, if you want it to have a different style of animation, you'll want to give it a different name because the name is what the class for CSS is going to be generated off of. So we have transition name. Now, in our app, we've got one less error. That's it saying we need an enter timeout. Now, what is an enter timeout? Well, an enter timeout simply just tells the animation when it's entering how long it should take. Now, this is going to be asking for a number value. So we want to provide this via brackets. So it's equal to brackets and then a number. Now, this is going to be in milliseconds. We want this to be 600 milliseconds or 0.6 seconds. I'm going to do the same for the animation out. Keep in mind these transition value lengths are not necessarily something that really matter right now. You can always tweak your animations to what feels best. I recommend pretty snappy animations. What I just did there is I went and grabbed the last required prop, which is transition leave timeout, and I set it to the same value. Now, check this out. You're not going to see a whole lot going on here. However, let's actually head to our HTML and let's go ahead and I'm going to click this select element. I'm going to select our items. You can see we have our div class with our item. It's wrapped in a span. Now, what we want to do is I'm going to bump up this animation timeout and enter value. Okay, so let's go ahead and bump this up to temporarily bump it up to 2000 seconds. Which should be 2 whole seconds. Okay, now I'm going to select our items here, and just so we can see this in the DOM, when I click at one of these, what we get is enter, you can see it really quickly. Actually bump this up to 20 seconds, just so we can see this without any interruption. Okay, let's do this again. And what we're simply doing here is seeing what classes are applied. When I click one of these, we end up getting item enter and item enter active. So what's happening is item enter fires first, then item enter active. So what we want to do is have our initial state, which is potentially something like opacity 0 and a transition, or a transform to move it out of the way, applied to item enter. And then we want to have our landing state, essentially where it is here, to item enter active. So let's go ahead and do that. In our CSS here, let's head to our CSS. Where is it? It's under client, main.css. Let's go to the very bottom here so we can find it nice and easily. And we can say dot item enter. And dot item enter is going to have an opacity of 0, and it's going to have a transform, and it's going to be a translate. Actually, let's do a translate 3D so we can get some benefits there from our graphics processor. And we can say, let's do a 100, actually negative 100% on the X value. We're going to have 0 for the Y and 0 for the Z. If you don't know this about CSS transitions and transforms, if we do a translate 3D, it's going to use the GPU and it's going to run better. So if you're using a translate, I would almost always use the translate 3D. I personally have a mix-in. I use Stylus in my own work, and I have a mix-in that's transparent that essentially just does all this for me. It's a really nice thing to set up. Okay, so we have transition enter, and now let's have transition enter hyphen active. Okay, so keep in mind this one fires first. So our initial loading of the item is going to have an opacity of 0, and it's going to be pushed off to the side. Now we want it to have an opacity of 1 when it's active, and we want it to be translated directly to 00000 position, you know? So now that we have this, let's add a simple transition. Now this transition is going to want to be the exact same length as your animation. Let's bump this back down to 600 because we don't need to see that anymore. And what we can do here is use for our transition, we want to transition, let's just say all. We want to say 0.6 seconds. Keep in mind this number is going to match this number. because that's the length of the animation. You obviously want the transition time or your animation length to match. And then we want to go ahead and give this some easing. Now you can add whatever easing you would like. I'm partial to some Bezier curves, so I'm going to say cubic hyphen Bezier, and then this is a function here that accepts some parameters. Now these numbers I'm going to give you are for an ease in and out quart. So we can say 0.77, comma 0, comma 0.175, not 4, comma, and then 1. Now, if you don't know anything about cubic Beziers or transforms or transitions, now might be a great time to check out the Level Up Tutorials Next Level CSS Animations and Transition series. Not intending to advertise or something here, but I go over basically everything about these cubic Bezier functions, how they exist, and making really nice and performative CSS animations, which is obviously something that's important to doing what we're doing right now. Okay, so we have our item enter. It's going to load all of this CSS. Then immediately afterwards, it's going to load item enter active, and it's going to start our transition. After it's complete with its transition, it's going to go to its normal properties, which of course have no transforms and no opacity definitions. So now that we have that, let's head to our app and let's click on one of these and let's see what happens. Zoom, it zooms in. Look at that. Man, super cool. So we have this one zooming in from the left. It's now obvious when we click T that the new one has come into our screen. But what about the old one? So let's go ahead and talk about the animation out now. What we have here is we have our item enter and item enter active. But we also have essentially an item leave and item leave active. So let's come here. I'm going to copy the item enter and item enter active and change enter to leave. Item leave active and item leave. Now, the funny thing here is that these properties need to be sort of swapped out if you think about it, right? The active state should end up transitioning to where it's 0 point opacity. So I'm going to set the active point to 0 and the translate I'm going to set to 100%. It's going to push it off the right side of the screen. And then I'm going to remove the translate 3D and have it be 0, 0. Have the initial state be 1. And so now we're going to get the same transition curve. We just have sort of swapped the opacity and the translate on these. So now what's going to happen is the moment we click this item leave is going to go opacity 1, translate 3D8, so it's not moving and it's still, 1% opaque here. And, well, not 1% opaque, but completely opaque and not transparent at all. And then we have this item leave active is going to fire immediately afterwards. It's going to take 0.6 seconds to go to 0 and push itself off the right side of the page. Now keep in mind here, when I click this, we do get this really neat one comes in, one goes out, but you can notice that it's not entirely perfect because both items are in the flow of the document and therefore they end up stacking on top of each other. So there's some magic we could do here with position absolute, making both of these position absolute within a container, but it's really outside of the scope of this series because it's maybe a little bit more CSS tricky than it is anything with React or Meteor. But as you can see here, our animations are working really splendidly. And what's cool about this is if we add a new one, so if let's say we wanted to compare CSS animations versus doing the dishes, obviously they slide in really nicely here, and CSS animation should win that one because they're nice and easy. Cool. So this is a really nice little system that you have with animations, but we're not done yet. You'll notice if we give this page a refresh, what doesn't happen, nothing animates on. And personally, in certain circumstances, I like an animate on. Right? So how can we do that? Well, if we head to the documentation once more, should always be your go-to. We can scroll down, and what you can see here is that we have a transition appear. Now, transition appear isn't available by default, so we have to turn it on. And first, we turn it on simply by setting in our app.js, we actually do this below, we can say transition appear equals true. Keep in mind this needs to be a Boolean and not a string. And then we also want a transition appear timeout. Okay, let's grab this. And we'll also have this be 6 seconds, like that. So as you can see here, these are all our properties. We don't have to turn on enter or leave because it expects an enter or leave. Those are default on. They're default true. If we were making a React prop and gave it a default value, that would be set to true for those. But we can override that by setting them to be false if you don't want them. But then we turn on transition appear, and then we set a timeout. Now all that's left is we need to write our CSS, which is going to be actually the same as our item enter. And so we can copy item enter and say comma dot item appear. Okay. And same thing, we can come down here and say comma item appear hyphen active. Now this isn't always going to be the case. Sometimes you might want to write your own appear CSS to have maybe a potential different animation. Maybe it doesn't slide in, maybe it just fades in. But this is going to be nice. You come here, refresh. And as the page loads, our voting thing just slides right in there. Boom. All right, nice. There's another vote for beer. Some more votes for lasers. Oh man, red panda. Okay, so as you can see here, this voting application has gotten really nice, and there's obviously a lot of tweaks and little things you can do to make it a ton nicer. However, most of the React and Meteor stuff is functioning as seamlessly as possible. I mean, personally, I couldn't have imagined writing this website in a lot of other technologies where all of this information is so easily saved to the database in real time. So these are CSS transitions using React CSS transition group add-on. Definitely come to this documentation page. There's not a whole lot more in here other than what we covered, but there's enough that you can read a little bit about how this is functioning, and you can read about the low-level API, which allows you to write your own custom animations, right? We get things like component will appear, did appear, component will enter, and I've used these on the Level Up tutorial site. If we go to Level Up Tuts or leveluptutorials.com. This site is built in Meteor and React, and if you come to things like these pages, let's select a tutorial. Let's just select this series here. You can see that transition that happened with React CSS transition group, but more importantly, when we click one of these, none of the content that's above here has been loaded yet. There's no content, and if you look in the DOM, there's nothing up here. But the moment we click one of these using the low-level API, it loads it and then slides it in. So again, the React CSS transition group is very powerful, and it's something that can take you pretty far in your CSS animations. I don't really bother with any of the other animation libraries because I can accomplish most of what I need with the CSS transition group add-on. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. There's only a couple of videos left. In the next one, I'm going to show you how we can add our packages using Facebook's own package manager called Yarn, and why that's maybe something you'll want to do. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.